Hey, everybody. Good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar, Polishing Up Your Study Skills, How to Prepare. We're going to wait a moment as we have people, I see the numbers going up, people filtering in into the webinar room. And then when we hit a plateau, I will jump in and start delivering the content. It's important to know that tonight we're going to be recording this presentation. And so if there's anything you want to review later in more detail and depth, we're going to send you a durable link to the recording. And that should be available to you. So you can share it, watch it again. Hopefully that'll be really helpful. We'll have time at the end for Q&A. And hopefully you'll have some good questions for me. I always like when there's interaction and back and forth and discourse and so forth. So let's wait another 20 seconds. People are still, the number's still ticking up. And then we'll jump right in. Okay, I think we're about to hit a peak here. All right, so I think we're here. Everyone, welcome. So happy that you have joined me for an hour this evening. If you're in the US or if you're abroad, wherever you are, it's evening for most of us. I'm here in Atlanta myself tonight. And the purpose of tonight's talk is to help your kids, help your students become more effective at studying. It's definitely a skill. How do you, and I've worked with students now for 21 years, and some of them, they're putting in the time and the energy and the effort, but their strategies are really ineffective. And there are times I'm called in to help kids course correct. I'm an executive functioning coach, but also, I teach general skills for studying. And my background is ed psychology and learning, cognitive science. How does learning work? How does the brain work? How do you optimize retention and memory and learning? So I can definitely share things with you from my own experience, my working with students, and my research in my doctoral work. So let's go ahead and jump in. The big two parts are kind of a quick review this is a 3-part series about how learning works and preparation. And the final one next week is showing what you know on tests. How do you perform optimally? This is how to prepare. And then so we're going to review key strategies to make you more effective at learning. And you're going to be learning your entire life. So this can generalize out from high school to college, grad school, and anything you are trying to learn, which can be helpful. So we begin. How we learn, how the brain works. So learning, it is a developmental process, and learning happens throughout the lifespan. I was talking to my mom this morning about that. She's 76 and I'm 47, like how learning changes, watching my 2-year-old daughter. We're all learning all the time, learning, growing, evolving. In learning, information is coming at the brain incessantly, and the brain's job is to figure out what do I retain and what should I forget. One of the key roles of the brain is to forget. If you didn't forget, you'd be in a lot of trouble. There's a lot of information that really is not very meaningful. If I asked you what you had for breakfast 14 days ago, I hope you have forgotten it. If you remember it, it's going to be a lot of jamming up a lot of neurons and signals and wires, which really is not helpful to your success or survival of those kind of things. So information comes in through our senses. We hear it, we see it, observe it, and then we select, what are we going to hold on to? If we don't reinforce it or rehearse it, it's going to decay within 15 to 30 seconds. Things don't hang around that are not meaningful. I'm walking down the road, I see a billboard, whatever, not important to see a sign. Until I tell my brain this is meaningful, you're going to forget it. And so that's just, the design of the brain. Unless it's something very traumatic or something emotional, or it's going to lodge and become more meaningful. But there are ways to encode information into the brain. And with rehearsal, practicing retrieval, using deeper kinds of processing, so things stick in your brain. And when you want to retrieve them in a day or a week or a month, they're more durably there, they're more available to you. So part of it is how you train your brain. Tell it this is important, make sure you don't forget this. So on the quiz or the test or the exam or the AP or whatever it is, it's actually up there and available to you. All right. So I mentioned that the majority of memory traces, things coming in, they're very fragile. If you don't reinforce them, they get sorted out, they get kicked out. But things that are important, they are consolidated. And the consolidation for memory takes place actually at night while you sleep. One of the reasons why sleep is so important, if you go away with one thing from this talk, is that at night, if you're trying to increase your memory, good, consistent, regular sleep hygiene, so essential for memory. They've done all this research now watching the hippocampus. They just parts of the brain structure the limbic system that just replays neural patterns again and again and again on fast loop that you've seen during the day, and it goes through them 100, 200 times, and then puts them up in the cortex for long-term storage. And if you disrupt sleep, that transferring from short-term to long-term storage gets disrupted. So sleep is really, really important for learning. And so, but beyond this, you have to commit that this information is meaningful, and the way in which you go, review information is powerful. Some of the students I've worked with, I watch them studying, and I watch them trying to learn material for a quiz or a test. And the most simple way, and the least effective way, is just repeating the information again and again and again. It's called phonological repetition. I'm trying to memorize a thing. I'll just say it a bunch of times. And I'm like, wow, that's going to be a long night of you trying to learn this material by you saying it again and again. That's not deep processing. It's not meaningful. That's repetition. That's rote memorization. And that is how you forget things very quickly. So it's way better for you to process, integrate, really learn, understand it, reflect upon it in a deep way versus just repeating the thing on loop a bunch of times. So it's deep learning versus shallow learning, for deeper encoding versus more shallow encoding. Talk more about that. Another important thing, I mentioned that, you have memory information coming at you, sensory input comes in, I see something, read something, hear something, and then on to the next thing. And typically that things degrade quickly. And there was a gentleman named Herman Ebbinghaus about over 100 years ago, got very, very interested in memory and how the brain works. And he was using himself, he didn't have a degree, he was just working with nonsense syllables he made up and put in a stack of cards, like la, ti, fo, ka. And then he memorized a sequence, he saw it one time and put it away. And then he tried himself a day later, 2, 3, 4, how much of the memory is still there, how much has degraded. And he found that things naturally, he saw a sequence of, let's say, 30 characters, 30 nonsense syllables. And by day 3 or 4 or 5, the accuracy was getting worse and worse and worse and worse. However, he found that if he took the same sequence of nonsense syllables and he reviewed them a day later, the forgetting curve really flattened. If he reviewed them one more time beyond that, a third time, and then like a fourth time, things, and part of it, what was happening is every single time you review and you reinforce the material, you're telling the brain, this is important, this is meaningful, don't forget this. This obviously has some impact, some import. It's not just a one-off. We're going back to this. So the brain says, oh, I gotcha. We'll make this more available. We'll make the neurons connect more intensely with synapses and strengthen synapse, even the myelin sheath over that neuron. We're going to make this, much more durable in terms of the number of neurotransmitters going back and forth. And so ultimately, the strength of the synapses or the memory gets more every time you activate this pathway of neuron to neuron to neuron, it locks in harder. So one of the key ways that you shift the forgetting curve, that you keep something longer in memory, you learn something more durably, is to review it not once, but 2 or 3 times. And in terms of, if I have the same amount of time, if I'm going to review something for 1 hour, it's better that I review it 20 minutes today, 20 tomorrow, 20 the next day, than even an hour, 20 today. Because each time you come back to it, you're telling the brain, this is still important, still relevant, don't forget this. And so there's ample research on the importance of distributing study over time versus massing it. Mass study, you might feel we're really getting it because you really get it during that session, but it degrades more quickly than if I took the same time or less time even and spread it out over multiple days, giving your brain time to forget and then reinforce and relearn it. Every time you relearn it, it's getting locked into long-term memory. All right, so again, he found that information decay was, again, Ebbinghaus, you lose half of it within an hour, 2/3 in a day, 3/4 after 6 days, and then down, down, down. And so again, his paired words, his nonsense words, when he spread out the sessions over time, really very meaningful increases in retention. And so every interval ups the retention. In the 30s, Spitzer did some research on retention of material, and in very similar content, he was looking at, you review something, you learn something. This has impact in terms of thinking about AP classes or cumulative exams or IB exams, where you have to retain things later. And if you see it one time, after 1 day, half is gone. After 7 days, a third is left. And then things flatten. You still remember parts of it, but you're down to about 1/5 of the material, and you've lost 80% within 2 months. And so think about after summer. And I've experienced this, and many of you on this webinar have it as well. I remember like my chemistry AP exam, my friend Tom and Dave and I just spent days and days cramming and grinding. We went in there got it all within probably a week or two or three. I'd forgotten probably 90% of that material, the way I was studying, the way in which we were really cramming it all in. Oh, something in the chat. 46. Thanks, Albert. All right, so we're moving on. The other thing to think about in terms of learning is that learning, the brain is wired to remember certain kinds of information. You have to understand the visual cortex is the biggest part of the brain. The sensory cortex, the visual cortex is like 30%. It's a big part. A lot of and the brain can move the cortex around. The cortex is cortex, and if someone has a stroke or they can move the visual part to the auditory part. Things move around. The brain is plastic, but out of the gate we allocate a lot of energy and resources in our brain to vision. Much more so, like auditory processing is like 8% or less, and visual. But the visual part of our brain is huge. So whenever you could put things into visual formatting, the visual format is better and it's stickier for the human brain than other forms. So if someone says, well, I'm an auditory learner, I'm kinesthetic, the visual system trumps them all. And there's research on this. And so we're all visual learners. Anyone who says I'm kinesthetic, we're all visual learners, but also we're also all auditory. We're all the pieces, but the visual center is the biggest. So if I can get processing, if I can array information in a visually structured way versus just semantic, just a text chain, it's much, much better for my brain to retain things if it's presented in an organized, visual, structured way. And so that's part of it. Can you put it in a visual format? Can you table it? Can you make concept maps? Way stickier than just text in a passage. It's much harder for the brain to hold text than image. Additionally, the human brain has been wired over millennia to love stories. We love and we impose stories. You give someone some random information and facts, we're going to create meaning and make metaphor, make stories happen. So if you can array things in chain together in a sequential pattern of things in a logical sequence, then the brain holds it better than like nonsense syllables. If I can make a story, if I can put them together, they're much stickier. So whenever you can make things that's one of the reasons with chunking, like we still remember things like, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, things that are linked together. I still remember homes, the Lake Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior, things like that. They stick with you. They're linked and chained together. So stories are lovely narrative structures. The brain remembers that those parts of the brain loves narrative structure. It loves things that are chunked together and chained together versus things that are loose and independent. So there's also some really important information, and this, a lot of my students don't know this, and maybe you as parents and educators or your kids don't know this, of the interference effect of learning, that it really is something. If I continue to learn over the course of a session or the course of a day, the longer I spend, the more I'm degrading the memory of prior learned material. That essentially it's kind of like Homer Simpson, where my brain is full and I can't hold anymore. Things are squeezed out. There is truth to that. And it has to do with the way the brain functions, how it stores information. The brain, it runs on glucose, and you have these neurotransmitters, that are bouncing back and forth between neurons. And after so much excitation, they get tired. You can only hold so much before you begin to degrade information. And the glucose stores get depleted, and we just can't hold that much more. Or I'm going to be retaining things at a fraction, versus if I stop, take a break, change topics, go for a walk, come back, I'm refreshed, versus I just keep going and getting less and less information in. And so information that is similar, if I'm spending 3 hours, let's say I'm learning biology, it's one thing I spend an hour, walk away, come back to another hour. But if I spend 3 hours doing biology, I try to cram it in, try to mass it all together, the similar information I'm putting in starts to interfere with the previous stuff, and I begin to lose the memories. I begin to, it becomes disorganized in terms of how it's encoding. And so what's interesting also, the brain likes to remember what comes first, and the brain likes to remember what comes last. And we often lose more material in the middle. And that's a concept called, primacy, what first, prime, and recency, what came most recently. And there's all this information about, even there's research Daniel Kahneman did with his work, that even like looking at someone's experience of a surgery, and if someone who's awake during a certain surgery, it's elective, but then if the pain spikes at the very end, then their memory of the whole thing was that spike, versus if the very end was generally benign, even if there was some higher pain in the middle or early on, what happens at the end is really more important. It's more, and it affects memory more. And there's ample research on this. But essentially, this is to say that if I have, a bunch of classes, like the middle often gets weakened, and the first and last things I remember more durably. And so there is a workaround to the interference principle that, there's a similarity issue. If I keep learning the same content, there's more interference. If I change up topics and I'm doing, biology for an hour, then I shift over to calculus or I shift to history, there's less interference because I'm activating different parts of the brain. I can show you some neural maps of it when I'm learning math, what parts of the brain are activating. When I'm learning Spanish, what parts of the brain are activating. And there are different neural patterns of firing. And so when I give certain parts time to relax and rest and recover, then I'm doing less interference and the encoding is more durable. So what that means is you don't want to ever go more than like an hour before changing it up, taking a break. And breaks are good. Like taking a break after a session, again, creates an ending and a beginning. So it's really, really helpful for students to go walk around, move your body. Exercise is fabulous. And some people use the Pomodoro, a little clock. It's like a little it's tomato essentially. And you learn for 25 minutes, take 5 minutes off. And those breaks are really essential. Even if you don't feel you need them, taking a moment to give your brain a chance to rest and your glucose to replenish and your synapses to recover, very powerful and important if you want to retain information longer term. And this, Kathleen Carey talks about, the way the brain works optimally is even in 12-minute little intervals of chunk, chew, check. I use this, I do this, there's value in this. So you chunk things down. Again, I don't want to learn material, just read for an hour before I stop and I reinforce what I just learned previously. You want to make sure you, after about 10, 15 minutes, you stop and then you reflect from, what did I just learn? What did I get? So you're stopping, you're pausing, you're making the brain retrieve. What am I getting? And then you check yourself. Sometimes you might test yourself. What were the 4 things I learned in that biology sequence? What were the name of the history, the events I saw with the characters? And you check yourself. And what's really powerful, whenever you force yourself to retrieve information that you just learned, you're asking your body to pull it back from the short-term memory storage to the frontal cortex and the temporary working memory span. That when I pull it back, I'm telling the brain this is important. I also get feedback of do I actually know it or not? So I tell myself, did I actually retain what I learned for that 10 minutes? But the very act of pulling it forward makes it anchor in deeper into memory. So that checking piece, chunking means a smaller section, chunk it down, chew, do some reflection, and test yourself. And if I have an hour of studying or learning, I want to have 5 or 6 sequences of chunking down, reflecting, and testing myself. Then the next thing, don't just read for an hour. Don't just do problems for an hour until you stop and test yourself. That really is critical. And that's something I teach all my kids. So make sure there's time to process and chew and reflect and test yourself. Don't just keep delivering content in a stream or you're not going to remember it. And I think about that like when I play a bunch of podcasts in a row, then there are times like I don't stop to reflect. I don't test myself. And I say, what the heck did I just listen to? And what was the first one I heard was when I play like an hour and a half of podcasts. And if you don't stop and reinforce things, you're going to forget them. So, if I were trying to, make you learn this, I would say, stop. What have you learned so far? I'd make you reflect on it. What did you get? And why is it meaningful to you? And then, in testing yourself. So these pauses are really powerful for retention. Other things in terms of how the brain works, it has only so much, capacity to handle stimuli coming in. So if I'm in a very cluttered environment, typically the majority of people, they retain and encode less when things are very visibly noisy or acoustically noisy. People are different in terms of their sensory ability to handle information. Some people, if it's too quiet, they can't focus. They have a sensory cup that needs some kind of stimulation, so they may need some music. Some people, if it's loud at all, they can't focus. They have a very, very small sensory cup and any sound overwhelms it. And so everyone, the way your brain is wired is different in terms of your visual processing, your auditory, every brain is unique, their own signature of how it works. So it's know yourself, but most people though, the more clutter there is, the more they have to inhibit that information and not attend to it, and that takes energy. So having a cleaner space, having more organized, less junk everywhere helps most folks focus and retain better. There's also information in terms of learning that as you're learning, there's the content itself. I'm learning chemistry, I'm learning history, but you're also taking in cues of the place. You're also, if I'm learning this material and I'm in a Starbucks. I'm encoding information about the biology, but also some things about where I am or the table or the seat, little bits. And so the brain is kind of putting it in, so the content's tied a little bit to the other cues of space. When I go and learn at the Starbucks, and then I go and learn the same material in my room, and then I review the same material in a doctor's office, whatever, I'm giving it these different spatial visual cues. And because they're, it's kind of anchoring different things, the memory itself of the content becomes more durable. So what they're saying is when you learn something in the multiple places, those contextual clues help it anchor in deeper. For, again, telling the brain this matters, don't forget it. It matters in the library. It matters at Starbucks. It matters here. Oh, the brain's like, this really must matter. Important information. All right. So how becoming a more effective learner, I've already talked about some of the material here. One of the key things you want to become in your life is a self-regulated learner. And that is pretty self-explanatory. Self, like I'm able to regulate my learning, because we're going to be learning until we die. And the brain, you're actually adding new neurons even into your 80s and 90s. The brain is plastic, we're learning. And you want to be able to manage your own learning, both in high school, then in college, then once you're learning professionally for your workplace or for a hobby. And now with the world of the internet and having these devices which have the world's libraries in our hands, so much of learning takes place outside of school. You learn a bit in school, you learn, formal learning, but most of our learning now is informal. And so you want to be able to regulate your own learning, choose the environment that works for you, understanding when it's time for me to change approaches, when it's time for me to get help. How do I set goals for a certain session? How do I monitor my learning? How do I know, do I need to put in more effort, get someone who knows this material better, turn on different, go on Khan Academy or find a better resource? And that has to do with, metacognition, understanding, am I getting this or not? Do I need to make adjustments? The really good learners are the ones who are reflecting and they're making adjustments. They're course correcting always as they're trying to learn material. And they stop. Again, that reflection is critical. And as an executive function coach, my job often is to help kids become more reflective and to figure out, like, you have a 60 in this class. I mean, why is this approach not working? What did you do? How long do you spend? Where, what time did do you work on it? What kind of help did you get? And did it work? If not, why not? And what did work? What didn't work? And so I get kids to ask these questions as they become more self-reflected and then more self-directed, more self-regulated. So that's really important for kids who aren't thriving, for them to get a lot more curious about what works for them. And self-regulation of learning, I'm motivating myself. I'm aware of my own, I feel more competent, more confident in myself. I expect I'll do well. I allocate the right amount of time for a certain task, time estimation, time management. These are all part of self-regulation of your studying. And so you want to find out, again, it doesn't matter what worked for your brother or your sister or your mom and dad, what works for you. And often as parents, we have to be somewhat, humble that our kids their brains are maybe different than ours, how we're wired. You have 3 kids, they're going to have, differences, nuances. Sometimes kids are very similar. Oftentimes they're very, very different in terms of what they need, what works for them. And so a system that worked for you may not work for your child. Here's how I studied and got through med school or law school or accounting, my college. That may not be as helpful for your kid based on how their brain works. So the name of the game is getting curious and then getting reflective and, really having some time to step away. Metacognition is a big word, but essentially it's being mindful. Meta is the high level, being aware of your own thinking and what's working. So cognition is thinking. So am I getting this? It's one of those things that if I read a book and I'm reading pages at night and I realize I just read 2 pages and retained nothing. Whoa, what am I doing? That's metacognition, awareness of my own learning. And also, like, am I understanding this? Am I going too fast? Is it time for a break? Should I try a different strategy? This is all metacognition. And we try to teach this. The word is irrelevant, but the idea is really important. Many kids overestimate how much they actually know. And that's one of the reasons why, they've read it a lot, they've seen it a lot, but can you retrieve it without any kind of supports or bolsters, like unaided recall, even though it's comfortable when I read it, I see it again. But if I actually give you a test or quiz you, how much do you actually know? And then kids who struggle with information often overestimate how much they actually know. And then, students who are doing well enough, will often say, I don't know enough. But often the ones who aren't calibrated think they got it and they actually don't have it. That's why testing is really, really, really powerful, to make sure you do understand as well as you think. There's aided recall, which if I see it, I can work with it. Then there's unaided recall, and many assessments are unaided. I have to retrieve it without supports. That's why testing is so powerful. So cognitive adjustments, again, the barrel rolling, course correcting. I'm trying to memorize it. It's not working. Let me actually do an outline or structured thing. Or I'm bored. I'm frustrated. Let me come back later. I need to change gears because I'm not getting this right now. So we have different circadian rhythms. We have different chronotypes. Some people, I'm going to get this. Give me 2 hours. Let me play some basketball. Come back to this. Versus let me just keep at it and I'm not getting it. That's again metacognition. And then different strategies. You may have the basic ones, looking for an idea. I'm paraphrasing something and looking up on words. A more advanced is I'm visualizing things. I'm skimming. I'm taking different kind of notes. I'm doing annotations. They're like having different kinds of strategies. And so when you're doing a session for studying, you want to have a goal. What am I trying to learn here? What do I want to be able to do after I review the material? And then after I finish my review, like, how did I do? What's coming next? And then you go again. So just being able to shift strategies and try different things versus often the learners I'm working with who are not doing well just have one strategy, they have one way of doing it. They don't have a big toolkit. And we try to expand the toolkit, try different things, see what works, what doesn't work. New information, one of the ways the brain works, the brain is a big network. And the neurons, everything is, we have the synapses which connect and move around and pivot. And so you're always tying the information into schema that you already have established. And so you're kind of globbing on to what you know. If I have no previous experience and you give me some new information, where's it going to live? It has nowhere to anchor into. Like information in the brain wants somewhere to network into. And so you got to figure out, what do I actually already know about this topic, this idea, what background knowledge, and trying to organize things and relate things, and then tie things to to things you already know. One thing that's interesting in terms of new information and in terms of reviewing, and it's a little strategy, is flashcards. Now I love flashcards, or Quizlet, the online version of flashcards, where you break things out into material. Three piles: stuff I know pretty well, stuff I kind of know, and then things I really don't know. And then the last two are the ones you're going to be really studying. And then only after you've mastered it several times do you move it over and then move it over again. But it's multiple rounds of review and reinforcement as you're getting closer. Do I actually know it? But even the material you have to review it every now and again, but not with the same frequency as the stuff that you're really trying to learn. So in terms of practicing, as you learn information, every now and again you step back, you review what was it about, why they write it, what are the key details, and so forth. And then it can come again within a day or so. But if that stepping back, that reviewing, that reflecting is really critical, and what many kids don't do. The other piece with learning, I mentioned that too much clutter is no good, but you really want to think about your space and be intentional about your space. As an executive functioning coach, I'm always looking at, where are you learning? How's it going? What's working? Is it too noisy? Too much distraction? Do you have your own space? Do you have a comfortable chair? Is it a common area, or is it your own space? And is there a clear division of what I'm playing when I'm working? And a lot of my students have to eventually put their phones in the kitchen or dock somewhere else, or they turn everything off, because your devices can really distract you terribly. And every time you get a ping, your attention is disrupted, and it takes 3 minutes plus to get back to where you were before. It makes encoding much more shallow if your brain is being pinged, and you're learning less. So you want to minimize those interruptions and pings if you want to learn something in a deep, meaningful way. So, and then the other piece in terms of having piles of things, organization, building out, things to do, things I've done, having lists, being structured, being organized as you're learning, emails as well, having folders and whatnot. Let me go over here. All right, so learning. An important part of learning is having a routine and I work with kids in high school and in college. When am I going to study? When am I going to work? What's the right time for me? Do I need a break? Do I have to go play basketball or play flag football and then do studying, then take a break? But having a routine that really helps, it helps everyone. You become a better learner when you become a more routinized learner. Then I'm going to learn when the mood strikes. Like really good learners, it isn't about when they feel it. They just have, this is my time, I study here. And of course, they can modulate if I don't feel well, I'm going to take a nap instead. But typically, between this free period, I tend to work. After school, I tend to have a break here. And you kind of structure it. a sample schedule. And this one, it's from John. And so some time, English class, social studies, science class, other subjects, go fun, have games. But, things are, structured, calendarized, things like that, kind of helpful that. And then, preparing like you would for school, when you're going to be studying, taking real breaks, like this, like for an exam period, like, actually having some formal structure to things can be helpful too. And then understanding, like, what are the essential hard deadlines, the things that are due tomorrow, things that have to be, be done. Make sure you cross things off. I think it's very helpful, very reinforcing. As I'm learning, knocked out this, I learned this category on this table. That's reinforcing that I'm actually doing something. Note taking is important for learning, the way you structure information. And I'm a big fan of the Cornell notes. You have, notes in the margin. You can come back and review and add comments. You can annotate them, and then you can summarize things. So the Cornell notes are pretty handy. I often did like a divided page, or I could cover part of it for info I'm learning, and then like the definition, and I can cover left side, cover the right side. So there's definitely more structure in the note taking that's more amenable to review and studying versus just a whole bunch of texts. I like having some structure to my notes. Can be very helpful. And then, we are better at encoding information if we come at it through multiple pathways, things I see, things I hear. When I was, reviewing my information for my graduate exams, I actually recorded it and I would play it back to myself. So I have it, and that's very easy with the iPhone. I was reviewing my key questions. I would walk through it, and then I just play it back the tape to myself. You see it. And body cognition is using the body. There are times I'm walking through point number 1, point number 2, and I'm using my body, kind of reinforcing certain ideas. And some people like throwing a ball against the wall. Often when I'm trying to review information and memorize it, I walk and talk, and that helps me, get the blood flowing. And I'm, and often when you're walking, you have, good thinking as you're moving your body. And then when trying to learn something, if you want something to stick in your brain, it's really helpful if the language you choose is your own language. Unless you're doing a play and you have to memorize it verbatim, word for word for the author's text, turning it into your own language makes it stickier in your own mind. Trying to put in words which you might not fully get or you wouldn't use on your own, it's going to be harder to really stick and embed in memory. So you want to put things into your own words and get the thing that sticks in that, versus someone else's language. That's helpful. Retention, optimization. I mentioned that every interruption takes minutes to recover. Task switching also is that, I'm looking at my phone, I'm back on this thing, very disruptive. And very few of us can actually multitask. It turns out if there are 100 people in a room, between 2 and 3 of them can actually multitask, and maybe 50 of them think they can. But when you actually test them, you have them do 2 things simultaneously. Both of them are degraded by the parallel product. Essentially, what happens with the human brain, it's ping pong. And any of you who have ever tried to text and drive, which sometimes, my attention's here, then it's up here, then down here, then up here. You can't really switch and share the mental attention. Again, about 2 out of 100 can, without degrading one or the other. And you can, but you're driving worse if you're reading your text, and you're texting worse if you're trying to drive, and everything else. Everything is degraded when they're happening simultaneously. That's the way that the brain is, except for like chewing gum, which isn't taking up much cognitive capacity and so forth. This is just some research giving you the actual data. Kids, do I want to mass my study and do big blocks of a bunch of chemistry, a bunch of bio, or break it up? A little bit of chemistry, a little bio, a little calculus, back to bio, back to chem. And while you're practicing it, and if I do an assessment while you're practicing it, immediately the ones who are in a big block of bio are going to be more accurate if I give them a quiz on what they're learning. And the ones who are mixing it up are going to be a little less accurate. They're kind of doing several things. If I come back to them a week later to test them, who actually is going to retain things? The ones who are mixing it up, the ones who are doing an hour of bio, then an hour of bio again, they have a much higher retention than the ones who did one huge block. So it's just, again, every time I come back to it, the brain is saying, this matters, don't forget this. So this is, again, this is the way our brains are designed. Self-care, sleep, hugely important for long-term memory transfer. It's also really important for brain health and everything else and diseases. But for memory, if you have an erratic, very highly varied sleep schedule, like shift workers, their learning is rocked. They forget so much, and they encode so little into long-term memory. Spaced retrieval techniques that if you want to, retain things for longer, space it out. I'm gonna learn it every 2 days, and then I'll review it again in 4 days and in 6 days. As I have longer intervals, I'm gonna retain it for longer than if I just, do Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If I want to really retain it for months, kind of space it out a little bit to retain it longer. Ample research on what works for learning and things that are interesting to me. Summarizing, if I read something and write a summary of it, not very helpful for learning. Highlighting, if I highlight information, underline it as I'm reading it, very low utility for enhancing my learning. Using imagery for text, which I used to ascribe to saying, imagine it in your head. Again, going back and looking at actual accuracy for later retrieval, very low. And then rereading. And this is one of the biggest things. So many kids who have come to me who aren't doing well academically, how are they reviewing for their finals, their midterms? They're just reading it again. They're going back and reading the chapter again. They go over the notes and they have to read it again. And it's passive. Passive review is not effective for learning. Rereading, I'd rather you test yourself for 20 minutes than reread for 40 minutes. I want feedback. I want errors. I want you to be forcing yourself to recall and retrieve. That's how the brain learns versus just reading it. Anything passive, you're not learning very effectively. So what is highly useful, great utility, is practice testing myself, quizzing myself. Do I actually know this material? Stopping yourself, closing the book. Do I can I retrieve it, unaided recall? That makes learning durable. And then distributing practice. Is it better for me to put in 3 hours or spread out the 30 minutes, come back to it, 30 minutes, come back to it? Way more effective for long-term retention and accuracy if I break it up the same amount of time or less, but break it up, way better. And also interleaving practice. That's evidence for, is it better for me? This is the whole interference reduction, the similarity principle. Is it better for me to do, a bunch of math or a little bit of math, then English, then Spanish, back to math? And there is moderate, evidence that there's efficacy of if I break it up and don't just do chemistry, then physics, back to chemistry. There's better retention. And self-explanation, what that is, it's kind of retrieval. I stop myself and I walk through, what did I just learn? That's better to me than, again, passive reading or writing. That's how that works. So learning is better when you struggle. There's something called desirable difficulty. I need to be a little bit more challenging. If I'm not struggling, like the brain learns by struggle. If there's no struggle, if there are no errors, the brain is kind of going along passively, not paying much attention. So getting a perfect copy of notes is not nearly as good as you taking notes and then working the notes. And then I don't want to write verbatim notes word for word. I want to make hierarchy. I want to circle things, say this is important, draw a line, this goes to that. The more I'm working on the material, the more I'm actually learning versus just me. Like in a courtroom, back in the day, a court stenographer is typing every word perfectly. You ask them later, what was the thing that was said? They have no idea. They're typing down every word perfectly, but you're imposing no hierarchy. You're not saying this is more important. There's no discrimination of important, not important. So writing every word down, that's not learning. But saying, oh, this is really important, big asterisk, the brain says, oh, I'm making some notes here. I'm making some discriminatory evaluation. This is important, not important. So passive, and kids often like passive. Kids like to passively review. They like to listen. They go over the notes, but the hard stuff is what works. And so I got to push my students to try the harder thing where there's errors and it doesn't feel as good, but it's more effective. So errorless learning, it's misguided. Some people are afraid of, making errors. Errors are brilliant. They tell you what you have to go back and review. Most of us don't like frustration, but it's how we learn. Mistakes fuel our growth and tell us what to do next. And then so there's ways to retrieve and rehearsal and practice. I can do concept maps, linking this goes to that over here. I can outline and structure things. There's still, if I'm posting some hierarchy, there's some value in that. I can make a list of things that they may quiz me on. I can do pros and cons of a certain position. I can answer the questions at the end of a chapter. I can look for themes and unifying ideas and make guides for studying, again, with hierarchy and so forth. Then self-testing. Whenever you teach somebody else, I'm having to retrieve things from memory, you are learning. So whenever I put together a diet of people, one person doing more receiving, more teaching, the one who's teaching is getting the bigger bang for the buck. The teacher, is the one learning the most. Asking someone questions, having someone quiz you, flashcards, Quizlet, divided notes for study, with covering one half, going over it, covering the other half, going back and forth. And then walking, self-explanation. I walk myself through all the pieces of a process or mitosis, meiosis, or I walk through all the phases of the French Revolution. That's retrieval. Long-term projects, want to lay things out, time to complete things, having dates in your calendar. I work with people on like putting things in the calendar structured when you want to have things done. So it's not all just open. I want to actually break it up into smaller pieces. Your teachers, engage with them. If you're trying to learn better, talk to them, see what you need. I had several students last semester who were working with teachers they couldn't understand very well. And at the college level, they had TAs who were non-native speakers, and going and talking to them, seeing, can I get your notes, interacting with them, telling them how to help you. So giving them feedback, and they're not the enemy. They are your friends, and they tend to like students learning. So engage with them when you can. And really good learners get help, and know how to, again, this is part of metacognition. I need some help here. I'm not really getting this. And also knowing how to get help earlier, so you're not getting help the night before the test when it's too late. So study groups can be beneficial if you have well-matched people, peers, talking to your professor, having a partner, you go back and forth, help each other if you're stuck. Some of my students just snap each other, how do I get this? And they help, I definitely had allies in high school and in college and grad school. Internet can be very powerful, very helpful in office hours. So you have to learn how to marshal resources if you want to become a good learner, both formally in high school, college, grad school, and outside. How do I learn this material? Who can help me with this? And then feedback, giving your, if you're a parent here, giving feedback, if you're a tutor, and then having some combination of, things they're not getting right, but also things they're doing right, kind of the sandwich principle there. And then sometimes, you're not seeing that you're actually making meaningful progress because the things are still hard, but that's when you step back and look at, objectively, have I made some moves versus I'm focused on what I'm not getting, but I am making progress. That's reinforcing, seeing you are improving. And a growth mindset, fixed mindset, Carol Dweck's work back in, now it's almost 15 years old, if not older than that. But you want to, integrate that mistakes are important. Mistakes are part of learning, and mistakes don't reveal that you're a fraud or you don't know anything. Mistakes are, okay, this is instructive for my next move for learning and growing. The growth mindset integrates failure, embraces failure, accepts it fully. And then you always want to encourage your kids to learn their brains, how they think, how they work, how they learn. Judy Bass, colleague of mine in DC, students who know what they're good at are much better off than those who only know what they're bad at. We all have weaknesses and strengths. I can give your kids a psychological evaluation where they're X percentage in math, learning, processing speed. We all have our strengths and weaknesses. And, you want to have them focus on what are you good at? Have some sense of efficacy and pride. I'm good at this. And even if, I'm relatively better at this, other things, and lean into your strengths. And then, encourage them to be curious about their brain, how they think. A lot of students have disabilities, or they may have a brain that's ADHD, is wired a little bit differently, different levels of processing dopamine, norepinephrine. Some of them like a certain environment to study in, but have them talk about how they learn, have them get curious how they learn. If you need music, I need music that helps me focus. I ask my kids to throw a ball or fidget. Don't try to inhibit that impulse, just do it. I chew gum. I need some of that kinesthetic, some movement. I chew a lot of gum when I'm working. I drink a lot of tea when I'm studying, when I'm working. I play certain soundtracks. And so whatever works, honestly, that's the main thing. And we're going to go through, I think it may be time to do a quick poll. If we could, then I'm going to do something else. This will take you all of 30 seconds. Let me know who you are. Are you a student, a parent, an educator? Check. Next one. If you are a student, at what level? Are you in high school or college? What level in high school, middle school, elementary school? Next question. If you need any help, test prep, academic tutoring, executive function coaching, and then would you want anyone to reach out? These are things that we do. This is our work. If yes or not at the moment. So that'll take you all of 30 seconds. And then when it's finished, go ahead and put that away. And Apple Ruth. So who we are, what we do. We combine science of learning and human connection. That's our work. We do three things: academic tutoring, test prep, and we do coaching for executive functioning. We have this series goes on next week. So if you like this one, we have one more. We had, it's going to be how to show what you know. It's going to be the act of how do I optimally perform on tests. So this is how to, before is how learning works. Today is how do I study? And then next week with John Cadenhead, it's going to be how do I make sure I can manage myself, manage anxiety, test day stuff, go in there and really deliver on assessments. So that's sign up for that on the 28th. We're also having a thing where currently between now and the 30th, if you want any help with any calculus or physics or whatever, Spanish, we're giving $100 off our academic tutoring, appleroot.com/academic. And finally, we're doing we have a writing workshop. If you're having a hard time with writing, we help kids get better at writing. That's our work. All right. And then, last but not least, our final one, we have a PSAT prep rally. Any of you who are doing the PSAT in a couple of weeks, we're doing free sessions, free practice tests, appleroot.com/prep rally. All right, now it is time for Q&A. We have 15 minutes, and I want to open up for questions and answers. And all right, and let me actually close this one. I'm going to stop sharing. All right, so how do I help children evaluate how noise impacts their studying? And so the way honestly, so much of this is going to be self-awareness and insight and experiment. You want to become experimental with yourself as a learner. That's a thing where so much of my work as an EF coach is helping kids try things. Let's try this out. I have an idea. Let's try it out. And let's try to study. And some kids are great with music without lyrics. Some kids can handle certain lyrics. Some kids cannot. I'm a non-lyric guy. I like softer. I can't handle the hard stuff, but I want a good beat, good pace. And so it's, again, you have them study material in a noisy place, in a quiet place, and you may need noise canceling headphones. Totally appropriate if you have to be in a loud place. But it's really an inquiry. There's not going to be. I'm not going to give them a formal assessment, but I'm going to have them experiment and try and report back. How'd it go? What was your experience of that? And again, as they become more directing of what they need to learn, they have to become better at that. Is there a self-assessment on your website? We do have an assessment that we administer for executive functioning for students, things they're good and bad at academically. But it actually comes when you sign on with Appleroot for some EF coaching. We're now doing this. It's a mind print learning survey, which we buy and we give to all of the students. And oh, you know what? There is a self-assessment for executive functioning. It's a short little quiz that we have. I don't have that slide, but there is a little quiz we put on EF coaching. That the EF little quiz we have a mini one for Appleroot. What happens at the prep rally? We're just reviewing key concepts that kids will see on the PSAT and helping them with some strategies, some ideas, some review. So make sure they go in there knowing what's going to be coming. Oh, hi, I'm nice and I love your content and your services. I'll keep you in mind for my families. Thank you for allowing me to enjoy your content. Oh, well, thank you so much. And yeah, I love sharing this stuff. I spent 10 years in school learning all this junk and the material, not junk, sorry about that. But it's content that I like to share. And I still keep learning always. And to me, it's, information, if you don't share it, what's the point if you don't use it? Are these strategies also applicable for folks with ADHD? Absolutely. The ADHD brain, having ADHD, you have different kinds of wiring, of cortical functioning. You have a harder time often inhibiting distraction or focusing attention. But these, all these things of review and reinforcement, these absolutely apply to the brain. In terms of the deck, we're going to send you a copy of the presentation. I'm sorry, we'll send you a recording, and that'll let you review that. We I guess have not been sending out the slides, but the recording this past recently. Are there any other questions? Any other questions about learning, about reviewing or learning? Okay. Content's always great for me as a parent. Is there a slimmed down, easy to understand teen version of your presentation that can be done at school? I mean, slimmed down, easy to understand teen version. I have given this talk to schools before, something like it. It depends if I've been called in for certain seminars and things, but we don't have something readily available or nothing online. But if you take notes, maybe share this with your kid if it's okay. I'm interested in note-taking strategies. You describe the Cornell notes. Do you have more information? And the part of it, best note-taking, there's the divided, format where you have, so you can easily review it. There's Cornell, which lets you notate on the left and summarize on the bottom. And those are the ones I'm most familiar with. What's important to me is the notes are structured. And some people, they may just take a stream of constant text. You want to impose some structure. Again, you want to impose some visual structure, so it's not just streams of words. You need to have hierarchy. And it could be that I go back after the class and I review it, I create, and I rewrite my notes with some hierarchy. This is important, and this ties to this, less important. If you're just taking like rampant just words, because a word salad is not great for review. You want to have it structured. So Cornell makes it structured. The split division makes it structured, and so forth. Okay. Now, for world history, is there an effective way to incorporate the learning in your brain? These tests are a little harder for me due to lots of information. I mean, for world history, again, I always liked, it depends on the way you're being assessed. It depends on if they're doing a lot of rote, they're going to ask you dates, in which case I'm going to structure things chronologically and review and do forced retrieval, where I cover the date and I uncover the thing. I test myself back and forth, where I link up this ties to this and have chain connections of how this feeds in. You could even like tell stories of how things are linked up in a certain sequence, or it could be they're going to ask you to recall and retrieve certain key historical figures. So again, Quizlet, flashcards, on the left side, the name of this figure, the right side, what they did, their dates, and just go back and forth, reviewing it, retrieving it, adding on to it, the pile of, I got this, and the pile of still working on this until things get solid. And you want to reinforce things. And so more than just once, if I'm doing the key historical figures, I do it on Monday, go over and review it again on a Wednesday. And again, smaller bits versus one big chunk. You want to bring it down to smaller sections is better for the brain to retrieve things long-term. Every now and again, I check in with my teen and say, do you want me to take away your phone so you can better concentrate? Is there any better tip? And part of it, once they're a teen, they're going to have to learn what works for them. And part of it's more of a dialogue, a discourse of how do you feel? How is it helping or hurting? Are you learning more effectively? Because soon they're going to be in college, they're going to do their own things. A part of it as a parent is helping engage them in this discussion, this dialogue, so the kids can become more reflective. What's your experience of? And again, everything is experimental. Of why don't we do an experiment? Why don't we try an hour with the phone on? Everything, your DMs blazing, your Snapchats coming in, Instagram popping up, versus do an hour with the phone charging, or you tell your friends I'm out for an hour, and then report back. And what do you think? How did it go? So getting curious, let's do an experiment, versus, having them, if we can get them curious, it's better about them. Because, and part of it is, in terms of efficacy, if I can get the work done more efficiently, then they have more time to actually properly play and have fun. And I always want a clear division when I'm working, when I'm playing. If I'm trying to do both simultaneously, both are degraded. And when I try to tell kids, I want to get you more time just to hang out and talk and be with your friends, play games, but I want to get the schoolwork done more efficiently, more effectively, so that you have more time to do what you actually really care about. And so I try to preach the values of efficacy, and it being more efficient, so they get more time for what they really care about, which is social with their teens and their friends and so forth. It's a good thing to keep your brain stimulated by doodling a little bit on your notes. I doodled throughout all of high school and all of college and most of grad school. And to me, again, my sensory cup, I need to be a little bit of movement. So chewing gum helps me move my jaw a little bit, get oxygen going. But I doodled constantly. And I think I have other students who doodle as well. Unless you're getting something so intricate, it's pulling you away from the content. But for the vast majority of people, I can doodle, and my brain is taking up so little of my cognitive capacity that when the teacher says this is really important, I go right back. And so I can do my doodle and also focus. So doodling to me is very helpful and same. It's like a fidget spinner for some things to keep your hand going. Because for some people, trying to inhibit that impulse to move takes cognitive capacity. So just giving it something to do, it actually, I can focus better. And so I would say if doodling is your go-to, it's lovely. I've done very well academically, and I'm a chronic doodler. I'm also a painter. I love to make art. So I think it's good stuff. All right. Maybe time for one more question. Anything else out there? I don't see any. So, all right. Well, in that case, everybody have a lovely evening. Thanks for coming out. I hope to see you again in a week. And if you need any help at all with anything for your students, for your Apple tutoring, we're here to help. And hopefully we can be a resource to you and your family. All right, y'all. Have a good night. Take care.